Right, big news today. As I said, lots of headlines around. Let's get my panel in to discuss it all. From Sydney, broadcaster Chris Smith, and from Gold Coast, Sky News Queensland Editor Peter Gleeson. Well, gents, welcome. Gleeson, I'm coming to you straight away. This inflation number, 5.1%, bad news at any time. But if we've got a cost of living election campaign, the coalition running on its economic credentials, this is troubling. They've had a bad week, I think, in terms of the Solomon Islands. Not their fault, but it certainly made the national security argument harder to prosecute. I have to say this isn't a bad week for them, but it's certainly not one of their best.
Well, I think when you think about this election and the issues that we're going to fight it out on, national security is obviously one of them, but it now becomes the economy, because as we go forward and we see inflation rates starting with a 5, and we look at what we've been through with the pandemic, we look at the global uncertainty that's going on with the war in Ukraine, and we look at the way in which there is continuing uncertainty around the economy. I think it's a gift politically for the coalition, because when people start to think about, OK, who will we leave in charge over the next 3 years with this economy that's so fractured and so exposed and susceptible to outside forces, the coalition invariably is the party that people go to. And I think, you know, in this election, when it all comes down to it, is it the devil you know, or is it Albanese, who can't even recall some of those key fiscal fundamentals?
Look, that'll be what the government is hoping people will have in the mind when they look at these sorts of issues. Absolutely, Gleeson. But I fear, you know, if next week, and the predictions are as early as next week, we could have an increase in the RBA official cash rate, the number that Albanese, of course, couldn't remember. Chris, that's where they will blame whoever's in charge, whether that's right or wrong. Same with Solomon Islands, whether that was the government's fault. It wasn't. It was, you know, officials in Solomon Islands wanting their palms greased. That's what that's about. Nonetheless, this sort of issue, what your mortgage looks like, particularly in places like Sydney and Melbourne, that's the stuff that moves votes.
Without a doubt, people are going to want to have to blame someone, and they always look to the government, whether it's cost of living. And I know the key components of today's inflation figures were a massive spike in petrol prices, which led to moving goods from point A to point B, and also the lack of supply on building materials and the price of those materials. Like, these are international concerns. And it needs someone like the Treasurer and the Prime Minister to point this out to the electorate and try and make them understand. But I still think that you'll find, as soon as the interest rate rise comes, maybe as soon as next week, as you say, I think the government will cop blame for this. I think it'll be a negative for them. And I think all the negative that has gone against Labor on economic policy will start to come back for Anthony Albanese, which is a pity. But if you go back to 2007, the same thing happened to John Howard. They put up interest rates then in the middle of the election campaign, and it hurt him too. And I think this will hurt the coalition.
I think the coalition can win the argument, right? I think they can win the argument on this. I've always thought they can win the argument and stand firm on not signing up to net zero. But they're not prepared to have that argument, Gleeson. I think Matt Canavan, he's pushed very hard on this issue about net zero. He's exposed where there are businesses now that will get this stealth tax. It'll hit jobs, particularly in coal seats. But Labor's, you know, speaking out of both sides of its mouth. And today it was all about divisions in the coalition, but instead it should be about jobs.
Well, I can tell you now, Matt Canavan, in my opinion, is one of the best retail politicians in the country. He's on the ground. He's everywhere in those central Queensland seats. We saw him, you know, welcome in Bob Brown's bus in 2019, which in many respects symbolised the problems up there. He knows how important this issue is for miners in central Queensland. He's desperate to ensure that seats like Flynn and Capricornia and Herbert and Dawson are retained by the coalition. That's why he's out there being a point of difference. I don't think, I mean, sure, you look at this and it could be division, but I think, you know, the Prime Minister will be saying, OK, Canavan in many respects is a bit of a maverick. He's out there, you know, telling these miners what they want to hear. I mean, seriously, is it really such division when you consider what the Labor Party are representing on this issue. The Labor Party, I mean, they are nakedly and transparently out there saying one thing in Rocky and another thing in St Kilda. I mean, they're renowned for it. I don't think it's a negative for the LNP or the coalition at this point.
And can I just add, Peter, on that?
Is solidifying the vote there.
Gleeson, I agree with you, but also Canavan's been on about this for about 5 weeks. 5 weeks ago, Boris Johnson said, sorry, we've got to put a pause on our climate targets while we try and break free from Russia and supply baseload power to the world and especially Europe. It was at that point that Matt Canavan has been saying this. You've been watching him on Sky News just about every second night saying exactly the same thing. But today...
There are 32 coal mines being built right now.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, read my column in The Australian tomorrow because I argue they'll turn themselves inside out, the government, to save seats like Kooyong, but end up losing government because they're not speaking with one voice in the marginal seats that matter, the coal seats, the seats where there are blue-collar workers, and this will be the challenge for them.